Welcome back. I'm Paul Mamelo, and we've been talking with Brendan Boyle. He's the Pennsylvania State Representative for the 170th District.
That's right.
And you started to talk to us a little bit about a piece of legislation that you worked on that dealt with domestic violence. Now, I know one component of that dealt with minimum training.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more of the specifics?
Right. My legislation essentially is modeled off a program that already exists and works in the state of Maryland, where they mandate that their both state police and local police receive a number of hours training per year, approximately 5 per year in domestic violence. The idea is that most cases or most kind of crime that the police deal with or encounter on a daily basis are of a certain sort of category. Domestic violence is totally different. Right. I know from friends who are police officers, it's absolutely the worst call that they want to get is a domestic violence call. It's completely different in nature. So as such, it makes sense to have different strategies and different tools that they can use to best deal with domestic violence and best empower the victims, which in most cases are women, who are the victims of domestic violence. So in Maryland, one specific example is in Maryland when there's a domestic violence call, they actually have a different form in order to get the proper data from the victim, and then a handout to give those victims of centers that they can call, shelters, hotlines that they can reach out, because a number of times you have someone, let's say a battered woman who wants to get out of a domestic violence relationship, but she doesn't know how to. She doesn't know where she would go, who she would call, who would be there to lend a helping hand. So what I want to do is give our police the best tools that they can have and that they can utilize in order to help those who are victims of domestic violence. I cannot overemphasize just what a serious problem this is in society. So many lives have been ruined as a result of domestic violence. It even happens in teen relationships. So it's really a quiet crisis that I'm attempting to make not so quiet.
And the way they're handled when police respond to them, as you mentioned, it's a totally different type of a case. And unfortunately, we often hear about officers responding to those types of cases and being injured themselves because you have to really know how to approach
officers injured, or at that moment the victim wants to break away but then won't testify against her attacker later, won't break out of that deadly cycle or dangerous cycle, which then becomes deadly. And I think I was mentioning before that every few days in Pennsylvania a woman is actually killed as the result of a domestic violence relationship. So it is a tragedy that we have to combat and that we have to get better at dealing with in Pennsylvania.
Well, in addition to your anti-crime legislation, you've been a strong proponent of education. And I noticed one of the bills deals with the REACH scholarship. Can you tell us some of the specifics of that? I think that would be interesting to a lot of our viewers.
Right. So a lot of my approach has been comparative in the sense that Jefferson called the states our laboratories of democracy. And so we have 50 laboratories. Let's study what is working in other states and see if we can adopt it here in Pennsylvania, especially if it's a situation or an area in which we need to improve or aren't doing as well at. So domestic violence was one instance where I'd studied this program that worked well in Maryland, and I'm attempting to adopt it here. Another is with higher education and the REACH scholarship. The REACH scholarship, which isn't in existence yet, it's my bill to create it, is modeled after the successful Hope Scholarship Program in Georgia. That has existed since 1993, and the way it works in Georgia is this. Any high school senior with a 3.0 GPA and 90% school attendance is able to go to any public college or university in that state tuition free. Now let me underscore that. This is not some pie in the sky idea. This is not something that someone running for office is just proposing. This is the law and reality in Georgia, and it's been that way for the last 16 years. Florida was the next to adopt it. They call their program Bright Futures. West Virginia has a similar program as well, and now a few other states do in addition to Georgia, Florida, and West Virginia. My version would be the REACH scholarship. That would be our name for it, but it's essentially the same program. A student with 3.0 GPA and 90% attendance would be able to go to any public college or university in the state tuition free. In Georgia, since its inception in 1993, more than 800,000 students have been able to go to college tuition free on the Hope Scholarship. Pennsylvania, we have no such scholarship. Instead, we have the second most expensive public colleges and universities in the nation. Now, does that make sense when we know that education is the ladder of our society? Does that make sense when we know that increasingly the jobs of the future require a higher education? So I'm a passionate advocate for creating the REACH Scholarship here. I was proud to introduce the bill, and I've been advocating for it since then. It's the fair and right thing to do if America is to be as strong a meritocracy as we want it to be. But it's also the smartest investment that we can make in our future, because we know that states relocate or choose to start up in areas where you have a well-educated workforce.
I'd imagine, though, in these tough budget times, you're having a lot of opposition to that one. What do you think is the prognosis for that legislation?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was proud that my REACH Scholarship idea passed the House Education Committee unanimously.
Oh, that's great.
Both Democrats and Republicans. And I would point out, in those states that have something like the REACH Scholarship or the Hope Scholarship, it is enormously popular. Now, of course, the fact that right as I was elected, there was a worldwide economic collapse.
Doesn't help.
It was not exactly the best timing for starting something like this that does cost a couple $100 million a year. But in each of the states that have some version of the REACH Scholarship, they've used expanded gaming as the funding source. So in Georgia and Florida, for instance, they didn't have a lottery. They created their statewide lotteries to fund the Hope Scholarship. Now, in Pennsylvania, we already have a state lottery, and no one's proposing to touch that. It goes to senior programs, and they certainly need the money. But there is an opportunity here through a different sort of expanded gaming, and that's with table games coming into existing casinos. The table games revenue, which is expected to be somewhere between $450 and $500 million a year, would be more than enough to pay for this program. A full REACH Scholarship, even after it's been in existence for 4 years, will cost approximately $275 million. So we could use just half of the revenue from expanded gaming, and that would pay for it in its entirety. And think of what that would do, particularly for hardworking, middle-class families. I know in my family, it seemed as if a lot of programs, and I was lucky, I'm the first in my family to go to college. I needed scholarship aid to go there. But I know for a lot of programs, it seems as if the middle class is priced out, that parents like mine didn't make enough money to pay for it, but always made a little bit too much money to get any sort of help. The nice thing about my REACH Scholarship is that there's no means test. Doesn't matter how much or how little your parents make, it is based on merit, on the academic quality of the student. And there's I think, a reasonable target of a 3.0 GPA. You have to work for that, but it's not so high that you have to be an especially gifted student to reach that.
Wow. Well, that's great. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I think you have some great work that you're doing. If people in our audience want to get in touch with you and find out more information, what's the best way that they can do that?
Well, if they're on the web, I encourage them to check out my website, pahouse.com/Boyle. They can also call my office. The phone number is 215-676-0300, and would love to hear from folks. Also, their ideas. A couple of the bills that I forwarded literally came from conversations I had with constituents. So if anyone has any good ideas out there, I'm always looking for them.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank our guest, Brendan Boyle, our state representative from the 170th